Trigger warning. This podcast is about grief. Whether you are newly bereaved or whether you have been stuck in grief for years, I do hope this podcast brings you some comfort. Grief is such a universal experience, but we all do it differently. This podcast is not about fixing you or forcing the healing process, because there is no cure for grief. It can only be absorbed, experienced, loved and cared for. So whether you are doing it privately behind closed doors, or like me, you are kicking and screaming your way through, let's support each other. This is a safe space where we can come together and share experiences. My hope is that this podcast shines a light on your path and gives you the strength to navigate your way through the grieving process. My name is Louise Bates, and I'm so pleased we connected. I'm looking forward to interviewing people who have also walked this path to find out what worked for them, in the hope that it helps you too. I'm sending you so much love and support, and I look forward to sharing this crazy journey with you. Hello and welcome to A Gift for Grief. And today I am delighted to have Tracy McAtamney with me. Now, Tracy is a certified grief recovery specialist and the founder of Surviving Bereavement Life After Loss. In 2019, Tracy became a published author with her book Hidden Strength. Tracy also organises pop-up bereavement cafes to support people going through grief and loss. So welcome, Tracy, and thank you for being my very first guest.
Thank you. I'm honoured, Louise.
Now, I've read your book, Hidden Strength, and I know your story. But perhaps you could share how and why your work with grief started.
Well, I'll probably start from the beginning, really. My life was touched with bereavement very early on. I actually lost my dad when I was just 7 years old. He died suddenly in an accident. And so that was the first time that grief actually touched my life. So way back then, things were very different. We really didn't talk about it. My mum used to... she just used to squeeze my hand, and I never really knew or understood anything about why the coffin was there and what we were doing. I just remembered feeling quite frightened and of the coffin in particular, and feeling quite different from other children. So moving on rapidly, my life did continue and lots of happiness, and married a wonderful man, had 2 wonderful boys, and in June 2004, which is 19 years ago, actually, which is really quite scary. I was a normal Monday evening. I was in bed when I received a phone call. It was the start of when mobile phones first came out. So it was a bit weird. This mobile phone went off next to me. I knew my older son, who was 15, was in the other bedroom with his friend. They were packing to go away on a holiday to celebrate finishing their GCSEs with John's family. And my Oliver, my 7-year-old, was actually in bed with me because Daddy was away playing golf for the Law Society. And as a 7-year-old, he would always say, when Daddy's away, I'm going to stay in Mummy's. I'm sleeping with Mummy. So it was the sort of thing we did. It was one of those moments I'll always remember. We'd gone to bed. I'd spoken to Tony the night before, and he talked about this beautiful room he was in. He wished we were there. The reason we weren't there was because Anthony was finishing his GCSEs. So we decided to stay at home and obviously support him. So I spoke to Tony on the Sunday evening. Just told me about the room, how beautiful it was. It described everything, really, from the window at the balcony. And I can remember him finishing with, I wish you were here. And that was quite a strange thing for Tony to say, because he loved playing golf, he loved the Law Society, and usually didn't miss me in the least. It was, it was his time to have absolute fun. So at the time, it didn't really mean anything to me. And he said he loved me. And again, that was the end of our conversation. So moving on to an evening later, I'm asleep with my 7-year-old, and the mobile phone goes off. I automatically knew there was something wrong, and managed to get to sort of crept out of bed with it into the bathroom, the ensuite bathroom, and I vividly remember just answering the phone, and there was just a man that said my name, and he just said Tracy, and for some unknown reason, I just said, he's dead, isn't he?
Oh my gosh! So you intuitively knew in that moment.
I've no idea why those words came out of my mouth, but they and when he said yes, I can just, it was like somebody had punched me in the stomach. I sank to the floor and went, so it was and it was just a case of, well, can I ring you back? Oliver's in the bed with me. Can I just ring you, please? Just give me some moments. So I had to go and sorry.
Oh, Tracy, it's fine. It's fine. You're doing
it's
well.
really weird. It's 19 years ago, but going back, it becomes real. It becomes now. So and that evening probably still is the most difficult night of my life.
Yes, yeah. And I'm so, grateful that you're here sharing your story, because there will be others out there that will have lost their husbands and partners or loved ones in a very unexpected and tragic way. And I can't imagine what it would be like to be in that position. And you're so brave. You say it's 19 years ago, but when you go through something like that, it's every day, isn't it? The fact that you're here sharing your story is going to really help other people as well, and make them feel like, realise they're not alone.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's I'm having a few tears now, because you do find the hidden strength, as I said in my book, to actually get on and to survive. But at the time, and even now when I think about the time, you just wonder how. So I think the worst thing for me then was obviously I had to make phone calls, had to tell. My mum was lived in the granny flat, so I had to go and tell her. Had the reaction I wasn't expecting. She burst into tears and really started to scream, and that shocked me, because she'd never done that. When my dad died, there was no tears, because she was trying to protect us, and it was different. But it was just, I think, probably going on and seeing your daughter go through this again, it was all too much for her, and I was really taken back by her reaction. But then of course there was chaos. I did make one mistake there, which I learnt too. Oliver woke up, and my older son, Anthony, and his friend, they went in and said, it's okay, Mummy's just got toothache, go back to sleep, everything's fine. At 1 o'clock in the morning, it's the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
But we still, later on, I discovered that because I hadn't told the truth at the time, it did become a bit of an issue, in that Oliver wouldn't believe anything his brother told him in future. Yeah. If he said later on, oh, Mummy's gone to the shops, it was questionable, well, has she, or was something, what's happened? So, you do what you think is right at the time. And I very quickly was surrounded by friends and people arriving at the house. And, even in the middle of the night, our local priest, he arrived, who had been a friend of mine for a long time. And I learnt from the golfers in Spain. I got back onto the phone, and Tony had actually died of an aneurysm. Well, we didn't actually know that. Everyone presumed he'd had a heart attack, because he was found dead in his bedroom. He'd felt poorly. He'd left the golf course, gone back to his room, and he had actually called a doctor, which is really bizarre, because nobody was aware of that. He hadn't told fellow golfers. He hadn't phoned me. He hadn't, but he clearly had felt very unwell, and hadn't really told anybody. And the doctor had been, and there was obviously evidence of that was on the side. But from what I understand, people just thought he perhaps strained his back carrying his golf clubs or something, because that clearly could have happened. Sadly, Tony didn't go down for dinner, and that's when there were 700 lawyers there, and obviously all eating in different restaurants. And suddenly somebody realised that Tony was not there, And when they went to the room, he was actually dead on the floor. So,
gosh.
and then it was, and I think they'd obviously found him early evening, but they wanted to wait for the one person that he travelled with that he knew I knew, and that was Brian Sheridan, whose voice I still remember to this day, just saying my name. And so this poor man came back from an evening out and having to make the phone calls to me. So that night changed a lot of people's lives, not just mine.
Well, it was so unexpected. He hadn't been ill beforehand. There were no signs of...
No, not at all.
Until
As I
that
say,
evening,
he and subsequently we found out it was an aneurysm, an abdominal aneurysm, which is very common in men apparently of a certain age. Okay. And that, it could only have been checked had they been checking something else. And he probably, when it did happen, he probably would have been dead before he hit the floor, which actually was, in hindsight, was a great release to me, because I was obviously worried that I thought it upset me that he was on his own. Yeah. But again, hindsight, Tony was a very private person, and I think that's how it was meant to be. I think, for him, it was probably the best thing. And, had the boys and I been there, it probably would have been far worse, now thinking about it, being in a foreign country with the children when it happened. So, at the end of the day, it was an awful shock.
Yeah. But I can imagine that brings you some comfort that it happened like that, but at that time. Yeah. And not only did you have your own grief to, look after, you also had 2 boys and your mum. So how do you get through that?
I think that is the worst thing I had to do, because having said I had to wait, I can remember walking miles in the night with friends in the pitch black, because I had to wait until 7:00 in the morning to tell Oliver that his daddy wasn't coming home. And as you can tell, my boys, that was pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
In that he was, his little face, when I went into the room, he could just tell by my face that something was wrong. And before I had a chance to say anything, he just put his hands on my eyes and said, "Please don't cry, Mummy." Yeah. And to me, from that day, well, at that time, if that was the only thing I could do for him, I didn't cry, which is really bizarre. Why I cry now is the fact that I didn't cry then. And I can actually... obviously, so daddy's not coming home. Yeah. And, but children are resilient. That's what you don't actually understand, just how resilient they are. He was quite funny. I asked him, did he have questions? And he said, well, where is daddy? And I did daddy's gone to heaven because lots of people need his help there. And I said, so we can see him up in the sky, or wave at the stars, and he's looking down. So I did all the things probably that, that seemed to ease the pain at the time. Yeah.
And do you find that because of your grief experience at such a young age, did that help you in any way to comfort the boys?
It did, because I decided, it didn't at the time. At the time, the shock was quite, from once I told Oliver, and... when we left that bedroom, he just he looked at me and he said, "Can we go downstairs now? Do I have to go to school?" And I said, "No, Oliver, not today." And he said, "Well, yeah, can I go and watch TV?" And I said, "That's absolutely fine." And as we walked down the stairs, he said, "So tonight, Mummy, can we look for Daddy in the sky?" And I can remember my eyes just, and I didn't cry because he'd asked me not to, but that was the worst part. That is definitely the worst part for me. And I can remember getting downstairs to a house full of people, and they were all sat absolutely terrified, waiting for Oliver to come in. And he just climbed onto the lap of a friend, Ray, and just said, "Okay, I'm going to watch telly now." Oh. And everyone was great sigh of relief. Yeah. But that's children for you.
Absolutely, yes. So how did you get, Tracy, from the darkest period of your life to, now you've written a book, you're helping other people through grief and loss, and you're making such a difference to other people's lives. How do you get to that place?
I think because, everything that could go wrong went wrong, which classically can happen if something's going to go wrong, and it did. We had all sorts of issues getting the body back. There was all sorts, and that it's quite a lot of the things are quite funny when you look at it. I think you always got to keep your humour.
Yes. Yeah.
So I travelled to Spain with Anthony, my son, and that's I began to breathe gradually from not being able to breathe and just being very quiet. I then started to think what I needed to do, and I started to make decisions. I had people around me all trying to make decisions, and I knew at the end of the day it was only me that could make decisions. And gradually, one of the things I can remember people saying was, "Oh, well, you can't take your Anthony with you to see his body because he's only 15." Oh. And it was, yes, he's 15 and he has a choice, and he's a young man, and if he wants to come, then he can come.
Yeah.
And and we had the strangest journey really, because it was like a role reversal. My son did grow up I changed overnight, but my son certainly did. We were on the aeroplane, and I'd always thought that my boys were both dyslexic. They're both incredibly bright, but they were both dyslexic, so didn't read till they were 13, and that used to really upset me. Until that was devastation for me. So it was. So we were on the aeroplane, and by now Anthony is sat there reading this novel, which was huge. I can't concentrate because that was one of the things that happened to me in grief. Could I concentrate? No. Could no longer read. Couldn't concentrate on anything. And in the end, he just had a big sigh, looked at me, and said, "Mother, we can't change what happened. Neither of us like this. We can't change it. But I can promise you, I'm not going to turn into a delinquent overnight. We will be okay."
Oh my goodness.
And then he pressed the bus out and said, "Can my mother please have a glass of wine on the aeroplane?" And it was,
wow.
And it was, it was just a really strange moment. And I suddenly realised, it was the right decision.
Yes.
And we shared a hotel room, and I can remember him sitting on the balcony and saying, "Okay, Mother, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to read, and I think you should go to sleep first. I'm just going to be there." And it was a complete role reversal. It was my son's grown up.
Yeah.
But I mean, that in itself was one of the things that worried me, because then you did have lots of people saying to him, "Oh, you're now the man of the house," which really irritated me, because to give that responsibility it's a massive pressure.
Yeah.
So that's really, so everything was going wrong. And while I was away, the Law Society also came in and froze all the accounts, so we could have lost the business.
Oh my gosh.
It was just everything that happens. So, I had to deal with so much, and suddenly I think, I knew I had to do it. So I did it, changed into somebody else completely. I don't think Tony would now recognise me. And I think what we all do, I think we all change when a significant death happens. Yeah. And, really, it was years later that I decided, by which time I was running my own networking company, and somebody asked me, I decided to tell my story, because I was in a room of ladies, and I said, well, none of us get here in straight lines, and this is my story. And people were quite shocked, because nobody had known how my story was. And then there was a lot of interest in what had happened, what I did. And I was asked to write the book. And that's really... Then I realised that people... I think I then thought, well, why would people be interested in my story? But then I thought, well, now I can actually say to people, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and you can get there, no matter how dark a day it feels. So that's really why I did what I did, and how I feel I can help people now.
So you've turned your pain into positivity, and by helping other people.
Yes. Yeah, I try.
Do you know, I've been to some of your events, and I was first introduced to you through our lovely mutual friend Lorraine Checklin.
Yes, the lovely Lorraine.
And she kept saying, "Louise, you need to meet Tracy." And she spoke so highly of you. And I know it was at a time where it was only a couple of years after Matthew had died, I think. And I wasn't really very good at socialising at the time, because, you're in that space where all you think about is the absence of that person. And you go to family events or social events, and everybody else is getting on with their life. And I used to feel like I was on the periphery of life, and I wasn't in it anymore. And it was so difficult. Yeah. And I remember going to this event of yours in Stratford and driving there thinking, I don't really know if this is the right thing for me. And I've got to walk into a room full of strangers. And when I walked in, you met me with such a lovely, warm welcome. I just felt immediately comfortable. And it wasn't long before I realised that most of the people in that room, probably everybody in that room, had also gone through a significant loss. And for the first time, I felt like these people get me.
Yes.
I'm allowed to talk about Matthew, and I'm not going to be met with awkwardness and clumsiness.
Absolutely.
And I was sharing my story and listening to their stories. And you had lovely Rachel doing a talk because she'd lost her daughter. And there was tea and coffee and cakes and sandwiches. And I could have stayed there all day. And I remember driving home afterwards, so pleased that I went because I felt uplifted, I felt lighter, and I felt like I'd met my tribe. And I thought about you and what you'd been through. And honestly, you completely inspired me. And now I've gone and written a couple of books, and I have this Facebook group, and now I'm doing this podcast. And I think that spark came from going to that first event. So you're making such a difference to other people's. I've never told you that before. I should have told you that before now.
No,
but honestly, I just felt, could you tell us a little bit more about your surviving bereavement work?
So surviving bereavement, I think when the first one you came to, I tried to do it. We tried to organise people too much on that at the beginning. I suppose I was trying to do it more like a networking meeting that I do regularly. And it just wasn't quite right. So now we do them. They're far more informal than, they are much, much more informal. We don't really have speakers and things now. People share their stories. But we just let people come. We just have the cafes and people just arrive and they feel safe. It's a safe place. They can talk. And everyone wants to talk. But then they start making friends. Because the one thing we both know is when things do change, people start to avoid you, and people you've known for a long time don't know how to deal with you, and they're embarrassed by the situation. And so the surviving bereavement, really, the cafes now are very much there for people just to come and be able to talk. And they build new relationships. People swap phone numbers. And my recent one this week, it makes me smile. There were 3 people in Kenilworth from my Kenilworth cafe, and they'd all lived completely separate areas, but they agreed to meet between them on last Sunday, and they had a lovely Sunday lunch out together, which through the cafe.
Yeah.
One that they'd both lost their wives, the 2 gentlemen, the lady had lost her husband, and they just met up and they spent the whole day together, and even I think they ended in afternoon tea because they enjoyed their company so much, because they all had the same thing in common. They'd all lost people, and They just wanted to talk, but talk with people that understood that sometimes they might cry. The same way I've just had a few tears. You do. It doesn't. Grief just doesn't disappear.
But we can feel comfortable in each other's company, where people that haven't been through what we've been through would feel uncomfortable and feel that we needed fixing because, you're still crying.
Yeah.
It's 6 months, 12 months, surely you should be over it by now. But, we all have our different losses in different ways, and grief is very individual, but what we do share are the same emotions, that same pain, the intensities, the anger, the deep sorrow, and I think when you're with other people that have gone through a very similar experience, there's a lot of healing in there, isn't there?
Oh, definitely, because that emptiness is so difficult to fill. There's a massive void in your life, and how to fill that is so hard. And you don't have to fill the void. You probably never will fill that void. That gap is always going to be there. I still very much grieve for the life I lost. I have a lovely life now, but I do grieve for the life that I lost. And when somebody dies, it's the loss of your future together, all the things you would have been doing together. And
Yeah.
I suppose for you, it was the opposite way. It was the achievements and things and the weddings and all the things that you didn't get to
Yeah.
experience. I see it from the other way. I actually see it was like last year my son got married and all the incredible things the boys have done, and their father wasn't there to see it. So it's I grieve for his loss as well.
Yeah.
So it's a really strange sensation. I cried at Anthony's wedding because I did the speech. It was probably 2 or 3 minute speech, and I wrote it. I wrote it to him and to Tammy, and I did it directly to them, and I made them both cry. And actually, I actually didn't cry on the day. I cried every day writing it, but then when I actually presented it, I didn't cry, but they did.
Yeah.
And it was just really moving. And because, you know, Anthony is the one thing I can say is Anthony is very much his father, his image of his father in all his mannerisms. He holds court in a room the same way Tony would. And, you know, that's what you see as well.
And that's lovely to see because you see Tony living through your boys then,
Oh,
don't
absolutely.
you, as well?
Absolutely.
Oh, that is amazing. So you also work as a certified grief recovery specialist. So is that like a type of counselling? How does it work?
So it's not counselling as such. It really is. It gives you the tools to work through any loss. Because, you know, grief, we talk about grief being just about death, and it's not. It can be about so many things. People going through divorces, people, moving house, moving jobs, you know, all sorts of things that can trigger the same emotions that grief show. And so when I did the grief recovery method course, I decided to do it because I wanted to know at my cafes, I was saying the right things, but in particular not saying the wrong things, because it's so easy to say something that is just wrong. And so it's great. And I also did part of that is also being able to train adults how to help children grieving. So that means going into schools and doing courses with teachers on how to deal with youngsters. And so the grief recovery method, it really is. It's great. It gives you the tools. So there is a book, the Grief Recovery Handbook, that anyone can buy, and that tells you the basis of actually going through the grief recovery method.
Yeah.
And I can certainly say to anyone to get that book and read it. You can just buy it off Amazon or anywhere else. And even if you just read the book, but it definitely gives you the tools to deal with all sorts of situations on how to move forward, how to move on.
Yeah.
So, you know, I can definitely recommend it to
well,
people.
that's good to know, because we're experts in our own grief, aren't we? And you're an expert in your grief. But grief is experienced in so many different ways. It's difficult to be a grief expert in everybody's grief.
Absolutely.
So anything like that can help you understand, because what somebody might say to me might just land perfectly, but for somebody else it might trigger them and be the wrong thing, and it's so difficult to get it right, isn't it?
Oh, definitely.
So I'm always I'm doing a course soon on bereavement by suicide. So I want to be able to feel confident about, you know, talking about all these different aspects of loss. But I think when you've been through a significant loss, it just gives you the confidence to talk to other people about it.
It's very interesting, actually, because my Oliver, my youngest son, who is now 26, he lives in London. He came home recently. It's almost a year now, because one of his friends committed suicide, sadly, and it was the boy he'd known well at school. They'd played rugby together, and in fact, the boy's parents would take Oliver to rugby every week because Tony wasn't there to do it. And Oliver it really triggered everything with Ollie, because it was the first he wanted, and I was so happy that he was talking about it, because it's so important for all,
definitely,
for males in particular, to talk about it. And he kept phoning me, and he was phoning me on a daily basis saying, I can't get my head around this. Why is he, what has made him do this? His parents were such amazing people. And, you know, I was always envious because he had his dad at the side of the rugby match. And I don't understand. And, you know, I said to him, and in fact, work were very good and offered to him counselling because of it, which I thought was, I think is so good now in the workplace, which he did take. But he felt free to talk. And when he came back to the funeral, his friends all came back. Several of them came back to the house, and I did a meal in the evening. And they sat and talked about it. And I thought, this is so good.
That's healthy to talk about it. Yes, definitely.
Because they were all in shock. All these young men were in shock at the loss of their friend. And so it's really, really important.
It helps them to process it. And also to talk to their friends so they realise that, how they feel is normal. Yes, because they see it in their friends as well.
Absolutely.
So communication is so important, isn't it?
It is.
And I think we're getting better at talking about grief and loss, but we've still got a long way to go in this country.
Yeah. It still is the elephant in the room for most conversations.
Absolutely.
Everyone shuts up immediately if you mention it.
Yeah, you get that tumbleweed moment. Awkward. But again, talking to somebody that's been through it, I feel really comfortable with you, you know. But I noticed in the early days, people didn't want to talk about it. It was my family were grieving, Matthew's cousins were grieving, my close friends were grieving. So people outside of that circle, you felt like you wanted to talk to people about it, but people would be just awkward and their eyes would glaze over or they'd change the subject.
People would cross the road.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's
I'd be walking down the road and people would cross the road. It was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, I think it's such a shame because it doesn't matter. It could be 3 people living in a house as we were all grieving differently.
Yes.
And what tends to happen within the family, I think, then you're all worried about each other and you're all trying to protect each other. Yeah. So you're all putting on a brave face. I was putting on a brave face for the boys. They were doing it for me. They wanted me to be okay. So you do get this weird thing going. Yeah. So, it is interesting to be able to explain to people that's what's going on. And I've come across lots of people recently in a similar position to me where it's a wife left with 2, in particular, 2 young boys. It's happened 3 times in the last year. Yeah. And it's been interesting just talking to these people and saying, well, this is what happened to me and this is how I found the boys were doing. And one thing we all agreed with is they look for normality. Children look for normality.
Yes.
That's one thing they want. And of course, you have to find a new normality, which is really, you have to reinvent yourself, new normalities. And that's the difficulties. But for them, they wanted to get back to school, back to their friends, back to just being as normal as possible.
Yeah. And that's really interesting because when I was 11 years old, my 17-year-old brother died very suddenly. And I remember at the time thinking, I'm not sad, but I only saw him yesterday. Why, I was more upset seeing my parents upset. And it happened on the Sunday night, so I didn't go to school on the Monday. But I was desperate to go to school on the Tuesday because I needed that normality.
Yes.
Because what happened to my life, it'd just been turned upside down. And I didn't really miss him because I'd only seen him the day before. Yeah. And I was only 11 years old, so I didn't really understand. And I remember being at school and the look on some of the teachers like, what are you doing here today? And I was thinking, just treat me normally.
Yes.
And, some of the older children in the school would come up and hug me. And I think, well, you wouldn't look at me twice, last week. Why is everybody being so nice? I just want it to be normal. So I can totally understand that. And it wasn't until years later, actually, that I really started to properly grieve for my brother.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I think a lot of us do that. I mean, I certainly put everything into, I did everything I tell people not to do. I put everything into a box and I closed it because I was too busy to grieve. I had too much to do. But as I say, I now do cry. It's quite interesting, having now put it all in writing. I do have those moments, and I think, gosh, how did you do that?
You are amazing. You are amazing. We are amazing.
I think it has to be a we.
Yes. So Tony was a keen golfer, and I read somewhere, I'm not sure if it was in your book or heard somewhere, that about a golf ball that rolled out from underneath the bed, and you believed it was a sign from him. So do you believe our loved ones can send us signs?
I definitely do. I mean, it was the strangest situation. I never really thought about it. My sister very much thinks about those things, and she looks for signs everywhere and sees them everywhere. And for me, I was always really quite sceptic about things, and it never really occurred to me. But when I talk about the room that Tony had told me about the last time we spoke, I was in his bedroom with his daughter, and Tony. So I've got stepchildren as well, which I'm really, really close to still, which is amazing. And Victoria was with me in the room, and we walked in, and everything was just how he'd said it was. And even his shirt was hanging, and his swimming trunks were hanging over a chair where he'd been swimming, and everything was just, and it felt calm. And the whole room, they didn't feel like there'd been anything awful happen in the room. And that felt really good to me. And I can remember Victoria saying, well, I'll pack Daddy's things. I'll do the packing. You sit there. And I sat on the bed, and as I sat on the bed, I'm sitting talking to Victoria, and we were laughing. She was saying it was a messy so-and-so, wasn't it? And we were trying to make light of things. And then a golf ball just rolled from under the bed. And we both looked at it, and it was, yes, to me, it was a sign. It was a sign of comfort. It was a sign of hope. It was a sign you're not on your own. I'm in some ways, I'm still here. I might not be here. It's going to be okay. And that sort of was a changing moment for me. I actually did believe then that it's going to be okay. I am going to be okay. I can do this.
That's amazing. So what are your thoughts about the afterlife? Do you have a faith, a religion or belief that there is something else then?
I would definitely hope so, because I think that's what got me through. I mean, yes, I've always gone to mass. It's quite funny, really, because I was brought up as I was christened a Catholic. I was then, when my dad died, my mum was Church of England. So my mum, the Church of England really looked after us, our local priest. So then I was confirmed in the Church of England, but then I married a Catholic, which is really quite strange. So I've sort of covered all bases on that front. And I do, but what I find, I don't try and overthink it. I go to mass, and I quite often sit there, and I find comfort from being in church. It certainly very much helped me when Tony died, because it was very important to Tony. He'd gone to a Catholic school. He'd been brought up very strict Catholic, but he really, really did believe, believed. And he passed that on to the boys very much so. And that made my life a lot easier when obviously when he wasn't there, to say that, he's gone to heaven. There is another place we will, it doesn't feel so final. So all those signs are important to me. And, and it came really sort of at the same time as Tony died. There was another friend of a friend. Her husband died, leaving a daughter of around 12 or 13. And they had no beliefs at all. And it was a really difficult situation, because it was so final, and neither of them really coped very well, because there was just no belief in anything. And I think if you've got nothing to hold on to, I don't really care what you hold on to, but I think it's important that you do believe in things.
I think it must be so difficult for people that have no belief at all, because I was brought up as a Catholic. My parents were big churchgoers. I don't tend to go to church now. I do find them very special places, and I like to sit in them and contemplate and feel that peace. But I suppose I describe myself as quite spiritual. I do have a belief system and a faith, and that there is life after death. But for people that don't have that, for whatever reason, I just think nobody knows really what happens to us.
No, exactly.
And it can just be a choice. You can choose to, just open the door to that belief a little bit, that there might be something there. And when you start to, find comfort in that, you might get a little sign that might just help you move forward in some way, or loosen your grief in some way. Because I suppose if you're completely closed to that idea, then it's harder to see those signs and things.
I think if you are so sceptical about everything, then I just have hope that
Absolutely,
I have hope that there is an afterlife, and certainly, as I say, I often feel I still talk to Tony. Obviously he doesn't answer me, but funnily enough, you do get sometimes the answers to my worries and my fears do then appear in
Yeah,
front
and you
of
wonder where
me.
they come from.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
So, as I say, I do believe definitely, but I just, as I say, I don't overthink it. And I can't certainly categorise myself as, it's the sort of Catholic that Tony was and how important it was to him. But I still do go when I can to Mass, but mostly, again, because I find comfort from it.
Yes,
And, it's just, I like being in the environment and it just gives me that bit of comfort.
Absolutely. And why not? So for people who have just lost a loved one, or perhaps for others who have been stuck in grief for years, do you have any words of wisdom you could share that would maybe help them loosen their grief in some way?
I think the main thing is that you have got to talk. You've got to be kind to yourself, and there is no time limit on grief. We know that, and as you know, I've just had tears. I've just had tears after 19 years, and it's quite interesting that I was asked to do a quote for a newspaper recently, and I read my own book. And I cried again. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? Why are you crying? You know how this ends. You wrote this. And, so what I'm saying is be kind. Allow yourself to be sad. There's nothing, you can be sad. You can cry. But equally, also remember to smile. Remember the good times. Keep your memories are precious. They're so precious. And as talk about your loved one. I mean, we still talk about Tony all the time. It's not always, we haven't sort of put him in this shrine. We talk about the other things he did that we're like, oh, do you remember when he did this and when he did that? And it's still, so when I meet with my stepchildren as well, because I have step grandchildren too, it's great. We have tears. We all cry because then I do the whole thing. I remember that Tony's not there and he never met his grandchildren. Obviously I don't have any of mine for my boys yet, but from Tony's former family, then, and we still try and meet every year. And it's so important because we talk and we talk about, and what Daddy would have done and Daddy would have liked this. And it really talking. And not trying to put somebody away and hide them away. They existed. Keep sharing those memories, keep smiling, because, keep the things that did make you happy. And they're still alive in us when we talk about them. So, yes, we've got to keep talking about them. We talk about Matthew every day, and he's still part of our lives. Yes. Absolutely. So where can people find out more information about what you offer and the work that you do? Well, I do have the website Surviving Bereavement, and that is being updated at the moment. And so the other thing, so we have cafes across Warwickshire and West Midlands. There are some more due to open. I'm looking for volunteers. I've had quite a lot of success in that recently. Our mutual friend Amanda Chalmers, who of course, Amanda does a lot of the PR, and everywhere I go now, people say, "Oh, we know you." And I'm like, no, it's Amanda's been putting photos out there again, and so we're looking, the cafes are great, and anyone that wants to come along and feel they can sort of lend a hand is great, because, sometimes if you get a lot of people and it's their first time, it is nice to go and sort of give them a little one-to-one. Whereas then they very soon start to make connections. So the cafes are brilliant. We do the grief recovery courses that I can offer one-to-one, and also group sessions. And so all that will be on the website. And also, of course, the memory boxes, which is very close to my heart, which we give out to children coping with grief. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. That is amazing. So you're a very busy lady, Tracy, and also director of Ladies First Professional Developments Limited. And you do a lot of networking. And I see that you won an award at the weekend. You only won Networker of the Year. I did. So tell us a little bit about this. I did. It was so exciting. So it's a really strange... As I say, my life's changed so much with each bereavement and things that has happened in my life. I changed, and I have this lovely networking company. I love networking. I love people. And what's happened is it might sound bizarre to have a bereavement foundation and a networking group, but do you know what? They really they help each other, because when I need things, also I beg and borrow from the businesses. And what was really ironic, last year I was invited by the Coventry Lord Mayor for International Women's Day, and I arrived in Coventry in the Lord Mayor's office thinking I was going into this massive room full of women, and actually there was, because we were literally, I suppose, still coming out of COVID, it was a table of about 20 people, and it was like, oh, how have I been invited here? This is quite privilege. And it was just funny how networking, so I was invited as my networking job there. And we went round the table and the Lord Mayor said, well, as we might as well introduce ourselves and what our connection with Coventry is and what we do and the networking. And it was really good fun. So we had a minute to do this. So I could see all these scary MPs around the table and all sorts of people. And May Parsons, who was the first nurse to give the first COVID vaccine.
Yes.
So there's all these amazing people. And I'm really thinking, I don't really know why I'm here. But I could actually do the 1 minute quite nicely because it came to me and they said... I said, I'm here for my networking and the work I do with women in business. And I sort of skipped over and I said, I have a bereavement foundation, which is very close to my heart. And I said, my connection with Coventry is that I was Coventry Carnival Queen. And I jumped out of the aeroplane with the Lady Mayoress. Well, everyone was in stitches and the Lady Mayoress nearly passed out. She said, they didn't tell me that was that was not on my contract. So it really was an icebreaker. But what was really strange, one of the ladies I thought looked really scary, who was an MP, she actually came straight over to me. She said, can we talk about your bereavement foundation? And
wow.
So last year, which is a year to this day, I ended up in Parliament. I was on the train on the day of, 18 years since Tony's death. There was me on the train to Parliament to go to talk about grief and bereavement. And I'm thinking, how did this happen? And it happened through networking. So It's amazing. So there I was. I now do also know that, I have been drinking in Parliament on the balcony and everywhere else. So it was really interesting that the two things crossed over. But to find myself there all those years later on the anniversary of Tony's death, it's like, this is really bizarre. But that's networking, and I love networking, and they cross over. I do awards. I really like to show appreciation to so many people that do such amazing things. So somebody put me forward for one, and I was so out of my comfort zone being on the other side. But it was really nice to be appreciated. So now I have my own awards. So.
Oh, well, congratulations. You're not only my first guest, you're a celebrity guest as well now. So it's been, is it 18 years since Tony's death?
It's 19 years.
19 years.
It's actually 19 years on the 28th of June.
Okay.
And I will be in Spain. No, I will not be in Spain. I'll be in Portugal with the boys at the Law Society every 3 years. The competition that Tony was doing and died at. I then had a cup made, and every 3 years this competition happens, and myself and the boys go out and present the cup. And so that's what we're doing in a couple of weeks' time. So it's and they've moved it from Spain now to Portugal, but it's still the same format, and we go and see some of the same people. So it's really nice to do.
Oh, that's a good thing to do. So I feel Tony must be very proud of you, Tracy. How far you've come. So how do you keep the memory of him alive? Do you have any family rituals to remember him by? Or
yeah, I mean, as I say, the Law Society golf one is quite important to me because he would have liked that, and especially he was Irish, so every year the cup's come back to Ireland, which is really bizarre, and yet it's an international golf. The Irish all seem to win it, so that's one way we try and keep it alive. I've always done a lot of fundraising in his memory, and really the foundation is in Tony's memory that I set up. But as a family, yes, we try and meet up at least once a year, and all of us and my stepchildren, step-grandchildren, and I think that's really important. And even Tony's cousins and people I still very much keep in contact with, and as I say, we just keep him alive. We keep his memory alive.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. So you've certainly found your purpose through your pain and loss. So if you could give Tony a message now, what would you like to say?
This is quite a funny one, because had you asked me this some 19 years ago, it would definitely have been, where is the will? Which is quite funny now, because it was obviously a massive issue at the time, the fact he was a solicitor and died without a will, and the trouble it caused us. It was, but you know what? It was character building. But I always said that was that's probably the one question I would have asked him. But no, I would probably want to say that he's missed every day still, and but he is still very much a big part of our lives. And if he is looking down on us from somewhere, I'm sure he knows that, and I just hope he is. I'm sure he's proud of us all. And when I see, including the grandchildren he never got to meet. Yes,
yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect way to end our podcast today. So I'm so grateful you said yes to being my guest and for sharing your personal story. We need to have these conversations, and I'm sure it will help others out there too, particularly those who've lost their husbands and partners, just letting them know they're not alone and there is help. And I love how you've turned your life around and how you're now supporting others. You certainly supported me going through grief and loss, and I'm sure your inspirational story will give hope to others too. So thank you so much, Tracy.
Thank you, Louise.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to this episode of A Gift for Grief. Please feel free to share it with your friends and family, and let's encourage others to become more grief literate. If you're struggling with your grief or worried about your mental health, please do speak to your doctor. If you would like to join me on my social media groups, check out the show notes for all the links, and I look forward to connecting with you next time. The music on this podcast was written and recorded by Matthew Bates and can be found on his 2 albums, Fight Back and Kaleidoscope.